Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of ruffled skirts, flickering gaslights, and whispered secrets, where social ambition hides behind a porcelain smile, and a pineapple of all things is the ultimate flex. You ease into a creaky, velvet armchair as a maid in spotless linen glides by with a silver tray of nothing you recognize. There's faint piano music in the next room. The wallpaper smells faintly of rosewater and mothballs, and on a table, bathed in the soft glow of a dozen beeswax candles, is a pineapple, upright, radiant, as if it were royalty on a fruit throne. No one touches it, because here, in this drawing room of Bath, that pineapple says more about the host than any conversation ever could. It's rare, it's imported, and it's definitely been rented. You probably wouldn't survive this social scene without committing some scandal, like mistaking the pineapple for dessert. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the edge of the parlour as a guest of the youngest Winthrop daughter. Eloise Winthrop, age 17, dreams of a good marriage and a slightly larger conservatory. You've been invited to call at 4, which in Victorian terms means show up at precisely 3, and never stay more than 20 minutes. Everything in the room is heavy with meaning. The crushed green velvet drapes suggest old money. The tea set, hand-painted with microscopic violets, whispers of Belgian imports. And in the centre of it all, yes, there it is again, is the pineapple. It doesn't belong here. Not really. It came from far away, likely the Caribbean, though no one says that out loud. It arrived on a ship loaded with barrels of sugar and guilt, and yet now, it sits here on a brass pedestal surrounded by figs, its golden skin gleaming like a sunlit brooch. You're not sure if you're supposed to admire it or curtsy. Eloise, smiling tightly, pretends not to notice how often you glance at it. Papa says it's the finest in all of Somerset this season, she says, and in her voice is the breathless pride of someone who's practiced this line. You nod solemnly, as if discussing a Monet. The room buzzes softly with other guests. 2 ladies near the hearth are comparing lace samples. A young man with tragic facial hair tries to impress a governess with his knowledge of Latin verbs, but their eyes keep drifting to the fruit. You lean forward, compelled by the weight of your curiosity. Do you eat it? You ask Eloise under your breath. She nearly drops her teaspoon. Oh no, she says. That would be terribly wasteful. It must be seen. This, apparently, is the pineapple's main function, to be looked at and talked about. Historians still argue, she continues, adjusting her gloves unnecessarily, whether it's best to display one at the start of the season or wait until the rival households have already tried and failed. You blink. That was a direct reference to the Mortons across town, whose last pineapple moulded slightly on day 3. The gossip, it seems, is built in. This is not just fruit. This is a social cue, a performance, a flex so pure that even Instagram would blush. And the rules are bizarre. If a pineapple is upright and centered on a display, it means the host is seeking new social alliances. If it is angled slightly toward the fireplace, it suggests recent scandal has been put to rest. If it's placed beside oranges, the family is flaunting its colonial ties. And if it is sliced, well, that means war or dessert, possibly both. One elderly guest, Mrs. Pemberton, walks a slow lap around the display, squinting at the pineapple, like a jeweler appraising a gem. Bit overripe, she murmurs to no one in particular. Probably Dutch grown. Shame. A low oof travels through the room like a shiver. That may have been an insult to the Winthrop family line. You sit back, trying to appear neutral. The pineapple just stares ahead, silent, judgmental, fragrant. There's something absurdly comforting about it, like a pet that never needs walking, or an unblinking butler. A footman appears with scones, none of which contain any pineapple whatsoever. "That would be garish," Eloise says, as if you'd even considered it. She explains how her father once paid a full guinea, an entire week's wages for a butler, to have one shipped overland in a special ventilated crate. It arrived just in time for a Thursday tea with the bishop. The bishop said nothing about it, but he lingered 5 minutes longer than expected, which, in Victorian circles, is the equivalent of screaming. You're handed a little card with the Winthrop family crest embossed on it. On the back, in delicate handwriting, it says, "The pineapple on display today was cut in Jamaica on April 2nd and arrived in Southampton on May 9th. Beneath that, in fainter ink, do not touch. Rental property. Yes, that's a thing." Apparently, the Winthrops do not own the pineapple. They've rented it from a London fruitier who specialises in show fruit. There's a whole circuit for this, with pineapples travelling from one stately home to another like slightly squishy celebrities. Each display must last no more than 5 days. After that, the fruit is either sold to a confectioner, or if it's gotten too smug, turned into jam. The logic is baffling, but somehow, it works. You glance around the room again. The guests are relaxed, engaged, glowing faintly in candlelight. No one argues. No one boasts outright. They let the fruit do the talking. A young woman sits near the window, sketching the pineapple into her journal with delicate strokes. Later, she'll press the image into her scrapbook with a lock of hair and a list of everyone who attended. The pineapple, in this moment, is memory, ambition, theatre. It is everything a hostess wants you to believe, and nothing at all. And you, somehow, are part of the performance now too. You are still in the Winthrop drawing room, and despite the elegant boredom of the place, your eyes are locked onto that pineapple like it might suddenly recite Shakespeare. But no, it just sits, spiky and smug, as the soft murmur of gossip circles it like perfume. Naturally, you start to wonder, where did this ridiculous fruit come from? You slide into a nearby armchair, your cup of lukewarm tea trembling slightly in its saucer, as an elderly gentleman nearby clears his throat and begins recounting, uninvited, the tale of pineapples arriving on English soil. He wears a monocle that may or may not actually work. "You know," he says, swirling a sugar cube in his tea without stirring it, "pineapples were once considered so rare, so divine, they were paraded through towns under glass domes." You nod, encouraging him, because you're polite, and also because that sounds about right. In the 17th century, long before Eloise Winthrop placed one on her mahogany pedestal, pineapples were stumbling into European consciousness via ships that had also carried rum, molasses, and deeply questionable ethics. They came from the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, St. Kitts, where the fruit had been cultivated and cherished by indigenous peoples, long before the British ever took an interest in its spiky charms. Of course, the moment someone in Britain saw it, they did what British elites do best. They claimed it, taxed it, and made it about class. By the early 18th century, only the wealthiest Englishmen could afford pineapples, or more accurately, could afford to pretend they had always had pineapples. A certain Lord Harrington had one grown in his own orangery, a kind of tropical greenhouse, and hosted an entire poetry reading around it. You picture him, posing beside it for a painting with one hand on the fruit like it's a trusted steed. It's probably not far off from the truth. The pineapple, unlike less attractive fruits, didn't rot in obscurity. No, it dazzled. Its golden hue, its spiked crown, its intoxicating scent. This wasn't a fruit, this was performance art. A tropical peacock, the kind of thing you'd imagine adorning the table at Mount Olympus, if Mount Olympus had dining forks and uncomfortable corsets. And the voyage from the Caribbean to Britain was not a quick one. Pineapples had to be shipped in ventilated crates, layered with straw, and cradled like royalty. Many didn't survive. So, the few that did arrived bruised, exhausted, but somehow even more precious for having suffered. One shipment in cost, the equivalent of 3 years' wages for a skilled tradesman. One pineapple, not a crate, a pineapple, No wonder some of them never got eaten. One story, repeated often but always with a wink, tells of a London gentleman who threw a banquet just to display a pineapple he had borrowed from a grocer. At the end of the night, he returned it with thanks, and the grocer rented it out again the following week. No one noticed, or if they did, they weren't about to admit it. Historians still argue, the monocled man says, peering at you, over the rim of his teacup, whether the pineapple's appeal was more about its rarity or its promise of empire. You nod again. The answer is almost certainly yes. In the drawing rooms of Britain, pineapples whispered of hot, exotic places without ever having to say the word slavery. They were the sanitized tip of an uncomfortable iceberg, a fruit that spoke of distant adventure while keeping one's white gloves perfectly clean. Still, not all pineapples were imported. Some determined aristocrats tried their luck at growing them locally. This involved massive glass structures called pineries, kept warm with ingenious brick flues and the heat of decomposing manure. Pineapple grown this way could take 3 years to fruit, and most died before reaching maturity. Like debutantes, but with fewer opinions. You can imagine it now, a red-faced nobleman pacing in a hot greenhouse, pleading with a sulky pineapple plant to just look presentable in time for the Earl's birthday. One particularly devoted gentleman, the Earl of Dunmore, built a literal stone pineapple dome atop a garden retreat in Scotland, still standing today, a testament to fruit-induced madness. Back in the Winthrop salon, someone adjusts the candles to better illuminate the pineapple's good side. Eloise notices your interest and explains with the weariness of someone who's explained it times that this one was harvested early to ensure it would survive the journey. The taste? Likely awful. The smell? Slightly misleading. But the appearance? Untouched. You notice no one has come particularly close to it all afternoon. Not for fear of damaging it, though certainly that too, but out of reverence. Like it, might curse you if you breathe too hard in its direction. And you begin to understand. This isn't fruit. It's proof. Proof that the Winthrops are connected, that their name can pull strings across oceans, that a few shillings spent on a fruit could yield social dividends for the entire season. You imagine the logistics. The telegram sent weeks ago. The negotiations with the fruitier in London, the fees, the bribes, the bribed bribes, and then the anxious wait, every day a servant checking if the crate had arrived at the train station, intact, unbruised, and sufficiently ripe. And then, finally, the ritual of placing it. No fingerprints, no brown spots. A carefully chosen pedestal, the right amount of indirect candlelight. Pine cones and fronds for contrast. All for an object no one will ever eat. You think of your modern fridge, of pineapples stacked casually at the grocery store, bruised and under $5. And yet, none of them look quite this sacred. There's something absurdly charming about it all. About a society so obsessed with decorum, so terrified of speaking plainly, that they poured their ambition into a fruit. The pineapple doesn't shout. It doesn't boast. It merely is. And that's enough to make or break reputations in this strange world of silent rules and fruity diplomacy. Outside, the light begins to shift, the golden hour casting a faint halo around the pedestal. Eloise glances at the pineapple and smiles softly, like someone enjoying a private joke. You find yourself smiling too. After all, who needs Netflix when you have a fruit that caused an empire-wide identity crisis? You're still seated, nursing a now cold cup of floral tea, and wondering whether the pineapple is judging you. It probably is. The air around it feels curated, pine-sweet, ceremonial. But as you stare, something else begins to take shape. Not the pineapple itself, but what happens around it. Because the fruit, glorious as it is just the bait. The real show is what Victorian ladies do once it's on the table. They gossip, quietly, elegantly, ruthlessly. And you, dear listener, are about to witness the pineapple's real power, not as produce, but as provocation. You shift slightly in your seat, and from across the room, Lady Cornelia Featherstone, casts you a glance. She's wearing a frothy lavender gown and an expression of serene judgment. She knows you've been staring too long at the pineapple. You've marked yourself a novice. She leans over to another guest, a woman in charcoal grey bombazine with a black lace mantilla, and murmurs something behind her fan. And just like that, a spark. The first ember of conversational combustion. Gossip in Victorian society was not idle chatter. It was architecture, precision work, whispered blueprints of power, rivalry, hope, and ruin. And the pineapple was a perfect launch point. Beautiful, status-laden, but harmless on the surface, like a starting pistol made of gold. Take Lady Featherstone's comment just now. I dare say the Winthrop's fruit lacks the curvature of a Ceylon variety. She doesn't say it to anyone, just lets it float. But within seconds, two other women near the piano exchange glances. One raises an eyebrow, another sips her tea with exaggerated calm. The implication? Perhaps the Winthrop's pineapple isn't as fresh as claimed. Perhaps, just perhaps, it was rented last minute. Maybe even a day after the Mortons' soiree. Historians still argue, one might later write in a forgotten journal, whether this was the first social blow exchanged between the Featherstones and the Winthrops that season, or simply the best disguised. You watch the guests reposition themselves like chess pieces. Seating arrangements are strategic. The closer one sits to the pineapple, the more one must appear unimpressed. It's a delicate ballet of proximity and disdain. Eloise glides by, again, this time offering candied rose petals from a crystal dish. No one takes any. The dish is symbolic. You don't eat flowers any more than you pet the pineapple. I believe Mrs. Dunsley once attempted a full pineapple centerpiece, says a girl seated behind you in a voice made entirely of silk and condescension. 3 fruits stacked, one atop the other, like a wedding cake. Terribly vulgar. You resist the urge to ask what happened to Mrs. Dunsley. You assume she was exiled, or forced to summer in Wales. These women, for all their frills and fainting couches, are playing an ancient game. The pineapple is their pawn, and sometimes their queen. You overhear one woman ask if the Winthrops grew their own. Her tone is so innocent it burns. Growing your own pineapple was the Victorian equivalent of growing your own diamonds. In theory, noble. In practice, impossible. But to imply it, oh, what a heady compliment. Eloise blushes. Of course not, she says. Father believes in supporting London tradesmen. The other woman nods, eyes gleaming. She's just earned points for making Eloise defend her pineapple. That's the game. You're not just judged by having a pineapple. You're judged by how you speak about it, who else speaks of it in return, and what doesn't get said. Reputation is a lemon tart left too long on the sideboard. It crumbles fast. Even men, aloof and monocled as they may be, are not immune. You spot Lord Eddings, a tall, vague man with a nose like a butter knife, quietly adjusting the pedestal. He wants to ensure the fruit's spikiest end catches the firelight. It's all about angles. It reflects one's business acumen, he says to no one, to display tropical produce with dignity. You blink. Did he just equate fruit display with financial literacy? Yes, he did, and no one disagrees. But the crown jewel of the afternoon is yet to come. At exactly 5 o'clock, a hush falls over the room. Lady Featherstone rises. In her gloved hand, she holds a tiny lorgnette. She steps forward with all the gravity of a high priestess. She circles the pineapple, once, twice, then peers through the lorgnette and makes a small, approving noise. I suppose, she announces with exquisite restraint, that it will do. And just like that, the battle is won. The pineapple, and by extension the Winthrops, are officially deemed acceptable, not glorious, not daring, but passable. It's the social equivalent of a C+ on a wedding cake that took 6 years to bake. You glance at Eloise, whose shoulders drop just slightly. Her mother closes her fan with the satisfying snap of closure. Even now, in all its golden smugness, the pineapple has not moved. But it has done something. It has hosted a duel without drawing a drop of blood. A polite war fought in compliments with razored edges. You find yourself admiring the sheer absurdity of it. How fruit became faction. How gossip turned decorative, produce into a medium of feminine diplomacy. How social success required you to weaponize politeness like a duchess with a dagger in her bun. And yet, it all feels remarkably peaceful. Like watching gladiators duel with lace handkerchiefs. Outside, a carriage rattles past. Inside, someone begins playing a soft waltz on the pianoforte. And you, somehow, are part of a story in which the stakes are pineapple-shaped. The waltz floats through the room like mist, stitched with the occasional clink of porcelain and the distant, whispery rustle of taffeta. You ease back into your chair, if only to avoid looking like someone too interested in politics made of fruit. By now, you've begun to understand. This isn't really about the pineapple. It never was. It's about who notices it, how they comment, and what's carefully left unsaid. So naturally, your attention turns to the ladies who wield this peculiar, conversational power like a parasol with hidden steel ribs. Victorian gossip, especially in the company of pineapples, was an art form honed with years of observation, training, and corseted suffering. The rules, impossibly complex. The risks, social extinction. The rewards, oh darling, everything. You watch Lady Saffron Melbury draw near a small cluster of women, her stride light but calculated. She taps her fan 3 times against her gloved palm, a signal as deliberate as semaphore. The other women lean in, and she begins. Of course, one does wonder, she murmurs, how a family burdened with so many cousins abroad could afford tropical shipping on such short notice. Translation. She's suggesting the Winthrops are hiding a financial hemorrhage behind that pineapple. Gasps are muffled. Eyebrows rise. One woman pretends to cough into her fan, though you're fairly certain it's just a stifled laugh. You begin to see it, how every syllable in this room is engineered. Double meaning is the currency. Pauses are punctuation. Even the angle of a teacup can signal allegiance. You're seated beside a younger woman, Miss Georgiana Westbridge, who whispers in a way that's half gossip, half stage direction. Watch for the double praise, she says. It's always a blade. Sure enough, across the room, a matron is complimenting the Winthrops' refreshingly provincial display. You can almost hear the footnote, poor things tried their best. You glance again at Georgiana, who is watching the crowd like a falcon in lace. She notes who is glancing at whom, who is repositioning their gloves, and who is pretending not to look at the pineapple, but absolutely is. Historians still argue, she says idly, whether the invention of the folding fan did more to signal secrets or conceal them. She's joking, probably, but as the room shifts and resettles, you can't help but notice the real influence isn't just in what's said. It's in who speaks first. The woman who defines the pineapple's meaning, subtly, obliquely, becomes the composer of the entire social narrative. Lady Featherstone, it seems, is the reigning composer. But Lady Saffron, she's auditioning. And Eloise Winthrop, she's trying desperately not to hit a wrong note. You imagine what this must feel like from her end. Days of preparation, weeks of correspondence, a fruit arranged like a grenade with the pin still in. And now she must smile, lightly, confidently, but never too much. She must not care whether they're judging her pineapple, because to care is to lose. You sip your tea, cold, predictably, floral. But the bitterness helps. The room's conversations continue weaving, gently brushing against topics like recent travel, scandalous book covers, and whether Mrs. Fairlight's new cook was really Portuguese or just tanned. In the corner, a woman describes the pineapple's pleasant resilience with the tone of someone evaluating marriage prospects. Across from her, another woman giggles too loudly and promptly excuses herself to the powder room. Her laugh betrayed her. Too modern, too eager. That will be remembered. Back beside the pianoforte, Two debutantes are analysing the pineapple's crown with the seriousness of botanists. One suggests the crown's angle suggests it was harvested slightly early. The other nods solemnly and replies, "Just as well. It would have overripe notes by now." You realise, with some dismay, that everyone in this room is now pretending to be an expert on tropical agriculture. It's contagious. Even you are beginning to believe you understand pineapple posture. You might even have an opinion on crown, integrity. What is happening to you? But just as you're mentally reviewing pineapple ripening cycles, something curious happens. The conversation shifts. One woman, a sharp-jawed lady in emerald velvet, mentions Lady Cresswell's recent indiscretion in Bath. Suddenly, all talk of fruit pauses, fans lift, brows arch, teacups hover, an indiscretion. In Bath, you lean in. But just before the juicy details spill, Lady Featherstone says, without turning her head, "Let's not spoil the fruit." It's a command wrapped in sugar, a queen putting her glove gently on the gossip break. And just like that, the room obeys. Talk slides back to florals, to upholstery patterns, to pineapples, because some gossip is acceptable, and some must wait until after dinner. The pineapple remains untouched, yet central, the arbiter of limits. You begin to understand why it's more than a trend, why for nearly a century, upper-class women in Britain used pineapples as both social mirrors and shields. The fruit offered an excuse, an object on which to project everything else. Ambition, envy, desire, control. It was the perfect diversion, frivolous enough to dismiss, but loaded enough to weaponize. And within that narrow margin, these women ruled. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the music trickle over you like warm bathwater. The scent of candied orange peel drifts from somewhere nearby. Someone laughs. Softly. Measured. Safe. You think again of the pineapples paraded through town halls in glass boxes. Of the pinery greenhouses heated by coal and compost. Of the man who built a 40-foot pineapple-shaped tower to prove his imperial credentials. All that, just so a room like this could perform its silent opera of manners and ambition. You open your eyes. The pineapple is still there, and it is still watching. Now the pineapple, having served its opening act and triggered, the correct sequence of remarks sinks into the background. It doesn't leave, heavens no, but it retreats to that stately role reserved for a monarch who no longer speaks, but is somehow more powerful for it. And just in time too. Because now comes the second movement of the evening's composition, the tactical promenade. One by one, the ladies begin to circulate. It's not random. There is an unspoken rhythm to it, a kind of migratory instinct like that of well-dressed flamingos. You're expected to move, not too fast, never too far, and to casually encounter people whose remarks you wish to sample like hors d'oeuvres. You rise, dusting imaginary crumbs from your skirt, and enter the current. To your left, two women examine a watercolor of a shipwreck. They speak of it as if they'd been there. The brushwork suggests a second storm, don't you think? Oh yes, post-rescue gloom. Very fashionable. To your right, a cluster of women discuss pineapples in the West Indies with the conviction of seasoned botanists. One claims her brother once met a man in Barbados who could smell ripeness through the crate. Another counters with a tale involving a sugar baron, a collapsed greenhouse, and a duel over mouldy specimens. Behind you, Lord, Eddings is explaining again why pineapples must be dry polished. Moisture, he declares, is undignified. You drift toward Eloise, who is now pretending to be fascinated by a tea sampler. She's flanked by two women you don't recognize, one dressed like a walking chrysanthemum, and the other like mourning lace reincarnated. Of course, says Chrysanthemum. My mother always warned against soft leaves. Spoke of a lady in Devon who served one with blunted tips. Imagine. Eloise nods weakly. She looks like she's contemplating a quiet death by doily. This is what you hadn't fully grasped until now. The gossip around the pineapple isn't loud. It doesn't crackle or explode. It settles, like dust on upholstery, like whispers tucked into a velvet curtain. Historians still argue, murmurs a nearby guest in puce silk, whether the pineapple truly replaced the poodle as the preferred conversational decoy, or if it simply inherited the leash. You don't know who she's talking to. Possibly herself. Across the room, Georgiana Westbridge is leaning close to a painting of a sphinx and saying something that sounds suspiciously like poorly rendered pause, very suggestive. Someone snorts, another titters. You spot Lady Featherstone again, perfectly still near the window. She watches the room with the tranquil judgment of a cat who's seen it all before and hated most of it. You pause beside a small table stacked with Victorian etiquette books, purely decorative. One lies open to a chapter titled Entertaining with Tropical Fruits, When and When Not to Applaud. Someone's added a penciled annotation, Never clap for citrus. The hostess, Mrs. Winthrop, makes a subtle loop of the room, checking on guests with the smile of a woman whose corset is exactly 2 eyelets too tight. She stops just long enough to murmur polite nothings. Charming weather for mid-December, isn't it? And we were so lucky with the shipping crates. You're sure she's practiced those lines, perhaps in the mirror, perhaps with the pineapple. A pianist changes to something in F minor, and the room leans into it. Conversations lower by half a breath. It's in this softened moment that you find yourself speaking with Georgiana again. She's inspecting a silver tray holding dried ginger. They'll say the pineapple matters, she says, popping a sliver into her mouth. But what really matters is how one handles deflection. You ask what she means. Well, if someone says your fruit looks store-bought, you praise theirs. If they imply you ordered it late, you mention how early you planned this evening. It's a dance, a very polite duel with no visible blade. You nod. It's starting to make sense. The pineapple isn't a weapon. It's a dueling ground. Exactly, Georgiana adds, her voice softening. And you must never over-defend. Nothing screams insecurity like someone who knows the import date. The phrase hangs in the air. Import date. What a sinister little detail. What a dagger disguised as a ledger note. You glance across the room at Lady Saffron Melbury, who is now admiring a collection of wax fruit in a glass dome. She claps lightly and says, "So lifelike, unlike some pineapples I've seen today." A hit, subtle, but it lands. Someone laughs behind a glove. You're beginning to sense the full map of this social theatre. There are battlefields here, and trapdoors, and hidden alliances buried under compliments about upholstery. You move back toward the pineapple, as if drawn by its gravity. No one's touched it. They never do. There it sits, fresh, perfect, ornamental. A conversation anchor, a social Rorschach. You wonder what happens when it's finally removed, whether everyone takes a polite breath or collapses in relief. Beside you, Eloise approaches once more. Her smile is brittle now, her fan fluttering too quickly. "I do hope," she says to no one in particular, "that it was just ripe enough." A murmur answers her. No clear agreement, just a ripple of opinions held tightly behind embroidered lips. And then, from the doorway, the butler coughs discreetly. "Dinner is served," he says. The spell breaks. Chairs shuffle. Fans fold. Gloves are tugged. The promenade ends. The pineapple remains behind, forgotten but triumphant. It has done its work. You follow the crowd as they stream gently toward the dining room, each step clicking softly against parquet floors. No one rushes. Heavens, no. That would imply eagerness, or worse, hunger. Instead, it's a slow drift, like geese in a fog bank, led by centuries of etiquette and at least one faint whiff of consommé. The dining room is all candlelight and restraint, anchored by a long gleaming table crowded with floral arrangements that smell vaguely of lavender and old ambition. The chairs are high-backed, the cutlery gleams like dental equipment, and each place setting contains, of course, a miniature pineapple motif embossed into the menu card. You suppress the urge to laugh. Of course the pineapple followed you here. Of course it did. You're seated between Lord Percival, who smells faintly of camphor and colonial mismanagement, and Miss Georgiana Westbridge, whose expression says she has been preparing witty remarks since Tuesday. Rule number 1, she murmurs, unfolding her napkin with surgical precision. Never be the first to comment on the soup. You ask why? Because the first person sets the tone for all dinner conversation. And if you misstep, she gestures with her spoon, you spend the next 6 courses trying to recover from the word lukewarm. You decide not to mention that the soup is lukewarm. The room is now a symphony of minor compliments. What a charming salt cellar. Is this thyme or marjoram? And the ever-popular, such a clever use of pickled turnip. As the meal begins, the pineapple, though absent from the actual menu, remains conversationally present. Like a mutual friend who couldn't attend but keeps being referenced because of some incident with a shoehorn in Vienna, Lord Percival leans toward you, voice gravelly with age and sherry. I remember, he says, a banquet in Bombay where a man passed out trying to peel a pineapple in under 10 minutes. You blink. He nods. It was the monsoon season. Terrible humidity. His moustache wilted. Across the table, a countess, in mauve lace, is detailing the pineapple she once received in a diplomatic basket from the Dutch. A little lopsided, she concedes, but deeply symbolic. The wine flows. Courses appear with clockwork precision. Quail eggs, chilled aspic, something jelly-like involving ham. Conversation widens now, drifting beyond pineapples into the broader terrain of tropical imports. Tea, nutmeg, rubber, someone brings up Captain Cook, and a mild debate erupts over whether his name sounds a bit too on the nose for a sailor. Someone else counters that his ship's name, Endeavour, was even more theatrical. Historians still argue, in tones, a barrister seated near the orchids, whether Cook's pineapple experiment was a colonial success, or just a very expensive picnic. You suspect he's being serious. By the fish course, someone has dared to bring up trade routes. A man with an unfortunate beard tries to explain how pineapples arrived in Britain via a complex relay of Dutch, Portuguese and Spanish traders. A fruit more well-travelled than I'll ever be, he says with a chuckle. Georgiana rolls her eyes. He says that every dinner. It's fascinating, really, how easily fruit becomes a stand-in for everything else. Empire, exploration, class, the unspoken hierarchy of who can afford something versus who must borrow it for display. And dinner, it turns out, is its own kind of battlefield. You notice how Lady Featherstone only takes a single asparagus spear and then waits. The rest of the table hesitates, measuring their own portions accordingly. There is an asparagus arms race now, and no one wants to lose. Eloise Winthrop speaks very little during the meal. She focuses on her knife work. Her shoulders are stiff. She laughs once, too loudly, and the woman beside her winces so imperceptibly that you almost miss it. Georgiana catches your glance. The pineapple talk got to her, she whispers. That's the thing about hosting. You never actually win. You're beginning to believe it. No matter how flawless the menu, how gleaming the silver, there's always the ghost of the pineapple lurking, judging from afar. You wonder if some women dream about it. Probably not fondly. A footman appears to refresh your glass, and you thank him with a nod. He doesn't reply, of course. Servants aren't supposed to exist unless someone spills gravy. Dessert arrives. Tiny, crystallized pineapple slices nestled in spun sugar baskets. The room draws a collective breath. Because now the pineapple reappears. Now it is no longer symbolic. It is edible. And to eat it is to risk comment. Lady Featherstone spears one piece delicately and chews with the neutral face of a woman who could read a will without blinking. You copy her precisely. The texture is fibrous, the sweetness understated. It tastes expensive. That's the best word for it. Ah, murmurs Georgiana. Pineapple for dessert. A posthumous redemption arc, if you will. Lord Percival is too deep in a brandy haze to register the joke, but you catch it and almost choke on sugar. Dinner concludes with the clink of cutlery and a few brave coughs. There is a moment, just one, where silence reigns. A collective exhale. As if everyone knows they've just passed through a social crucible. And then the chairs scrape politely, and the women rise to retire. Eloise's eyes are shiny, but she's still standing. That, you suppose, is what matters. Back in the drawing room, the air is thicker, not just with scent, but with tension relaxed into post-dinner languor. The candles have burned lower, casting a sleepy amber light over everyone's expressions. A small breeze from an open window rustles the lace curtain like a sigh too tired to finish. You drift in alongside the other ladies, a loose formation of silks and satin, the occasional metallic jingle of hairpins punctuating the soft crush of carpet underfoot. And there it is again, the pineapple, still seated atop its embroidered pedestal, looking neither diminished nor particularly triumphant, just patient, waiting, like a butler who knows where the real secrets are buried and would never dream of telling, unless asked politely and over tea. This, you're starting to learn, is its truest power. Funny, isn't it? Says Georgiana, swirling a small glass of elderflower cordial. We talk about it, dance around it, toast it, only to end up right back here again, staring at it like it owes us money. You admit the pineapple does seem more ominous now. She chuckles. That's digestion, dear. You settle into a low-backed chair by the fireplace, which is crackling just enough to be smug. Around you, conversations resume, but softer now. The edge is gone. Everyone's a little sleepier, a little more open. The critiques have mellowed from daggers to fond nudges. I adored the pineapple slices, someone coos. Such delicate acidity. It reminded me of Lisbon, says another, though perhaps I imagined that. Eloise returns last. She glides into the room like a woman who's survived a small war. Her smile is more convincing now, her posture less brittle. She makes a circuit of the room, exchanging pleasantries, touching shoulders lightly, as if reminding everyone she is still the hostess, even if the pineapple upstaged her. She reaches you and pauses. I think, she says carefully, it went rather well. You agree, and she exhales. A single, invisible thread of tension gone. I was terrified someone would notice the bruise. You blink. What bruise? Eloise tilts her head toward the pineapple. Near the base. Tiny, but there. I nearly wept. You had not noticed the bruise. No one had. But you realize now that it haunted her all evening. The threat of its discovery, the possible murmurs, the implied insult. Georgiana leans over. See, we all battle the same absurdities. It's just some of us are better at hiding it. Someone nearby has begun playing a quiet melody on the pianoforte, something meandering and minor key, like a lullaby that forgot to cheer up at the end. It fills the space gently, carrying conversations on its back. You overhear someone recounting the tale of a pineapple that travelled from Jamaica to Edinburgh over 3 months, packed in straw and regret. When it arrived, she says, the family wept, mostly from the smell. Someone else wonders aloud whether pineapples were ever used as currency in unofficial courtships, like a promise ring, but sharper. Historians still argue, says a gentleman near the window, whether pineapple gifting was ever intended romantically or if it was purely mercantile flattery. You glance toward the fruit once more, wondering, did anyone ever propose with one? The room has entered that particular post-meal rhythm, where words begin to slow, and pauses grow longer than the sentences they follow. An older woman, Lady Cresswell, you think, has nodded off in a velvet settee, her gloved hand still resting on a saucer. No one wakes her. It seems appropriate somehow. The fire pops. Someone yawns behind a fan. Georgiana now rests her head on her hand, no longer, filtering her comments. You know, she says quietly, in the right light, that pineapple looks like a crown for someone very short and extremely stylish. You laugh softly, careful not to wake Lady Cresswell. A moment later, you hear Eloise say, I never actually tasted it. The big one. I was too afraid. You consider telling her that was wise, that some fruits aren't meant to be eaten, only admired from a polite distance and maybe dreamt about later. But instead, you say, "There's always tomorrow." She nods. The pianoforte melody winds down, a few uncertain notes left hanging in the air like distant stars. Someone fetches a shawl. Another checks the time and gasps as though they've slept through a century. A final round of cordial is offered. You accept it. It tastes faintly of mint and goodbyes. Outside, the moon is up. You can see it framed in the tall windows, quiet, indifferent as always. And the pineapple, it remains where it began. Not just a fruit anymore, a character in its own right, a social fulcrum, a minor deity in the pantheon of genteel chaos. You have to admit, it's grown on you. You leave the drawing room as if pulled by tide. Not hurried, not reluctant, just carried. The corridor is hushed now, emptied of chatter and lit only by faint sconces that give everything a gentle, buttered glow. Somewhere, a clock chimes the quarter hour in a tone that sounds more apologetic than punctual. Your room is waiting upstairs. Warmed bricks behind the fireplace, a pitcher of rosewater on the washstand, and a single candle flickering in its brass holder like a loyal, slightly nervous footman. You sit down at the vanity. A strange thing happens in a guest room at night. The grandeur dissolves. The tapestries stop trying to impress. The mirrors reflect only your own tired curiosity, and the embroidered monogram on the pillow no longer whispers legacy, just linen. And yet, on the writing desk, there it is again. Another pineapple. This one is small, decorative, carved from ivory, and perched atop a stack of etiquette books. You have to smile. Even now, even in your private space, the fruit finds you. You lean back in your chair. Tonight has been a journey, not across continents or centuries, but through the very specific topography of polite English anxiety. You have survived dinner with strangers. You have outwitted a side dish. You have deciphered a language written in hairpins, glances, and silent critiques. And you begin to suspect that Victorian ladies, those tight-corseted social athletes, found the pineapple not only symbolic, but something of a coping mechanism. A way to reframe the battlefield, to project elegance while weathering little storms of status, ambition, and a constant fear of saying something slightly gauche. Georgiana's voice echoes in your head. The pineapple is a test we keep giving ourselves, even when we know the grade won't matter. You unpin your hair slowly. Each twist released feels like exhaling. You think of Eloise, of her bruised fruit and her unbruised resolve. The fact that she hosted, worried, smiled, and still found the strength to admit her terror. You wonder how many pineapples she's hosted in her lifetime. How many nights she's sat in a similar room, wondering if someone noticed the stain on the tablecloth, or the draft in the hallway, or the candle that burned down too fast. Historians still argue, you recall from earlier, whether Victorian hostessing was more performance or more pressure. You think it's probably both, like singing while walking a tightrope, grace under scrutiny. And then there are the books. You thumb through the etiquette volume stacked beneath the ivory pineapple. It's one of those glossy, moralizing tomes, with long titles like hints to young ladies upon correct conduct and dinner arrangement. You flip to a random page and find, you blink. That's oddly specific. Another page warns against expressive eyebrows during mealtime. A third insists that tropical references should be kept to under 3 per course. You set it down. Clearly someone had a bad experience in Jamaica. By now, your limbs have softened. Your corset, half unlaced, feels less like armor and more like memory foam. Your stockings puddle quietly at your feet. You stretch, cat-like, then pad barefoot to the window. Outside, the garden is a hush of silver. Moonlight spills across gravel paths and clipped hedges. Somewhere, a hedgehog trundles through dry leaves, on a mission both small and absolute. You imagine Victorian women doing the same, sneaking to windows, not for escape but perspective, To remember that there is a world beyond the drawing room, one without expectations, guest lists, or garnished fruit. The candle flutters. You return to bed. The sheets are cool, crisp, and faintly lavender-scented, ironed within an inch of their lives. You sink into them gratefully, the pillow giving, with a gentle sigh as if welcoming your face like an old friend. Your eyes flutter shut, but your mind, like any decent dinner guest, lingers a little longer. You imagine being back in that parlour, only this time the pineapple speaks. In a rich, fruity baritone, it leans in and says, "You did very well tonight. Most people forget their fish fork." You smile in the dark. Sleep edges closer. Maybe tomorrow there will be fewer rules, or at least different fruit. Perhaps a mango. Less judgmental, surely. But for tonight, you rest easy, knowing you made it through the gauntlet of glances, the whispered critiques, and the pineapple's unblinking scrutiny. You belong here, bruises and all. Morning returns quietly. You wake to the hesitant chirp of a wren outside the window, its little voice sounding like it's checking to see if anyone else is awake yet. The light has that soft, pearly tint unique to English mornings, somewhere between optimism and damp resignation. You stretch, slow and sprawling, as if the air is made of syrup. The pineapple is still on the desk. It hasn't moved, of course. It's not that kind of story, but you could swear it's somehow smugger than before. The faint glisten on its carved ridges catches the morning light like a self-satisfied smirk. There's something comforting about waking up in someone else's house after surviving a social evening. You've passed the trial, the parlour games, the silverware gauntlet, the whispered barbs disguised as compliments. And now comes the reward, sleepy breakfast. Downstairs, the clatter of teacups and murmured greetings beckons. You wash your face in cool rose water, tame your hair into something vaguely obedient, and wrap yourself in the sort of shawl that suggests leisure, intelligence, and mild joint discomfort. In the breakfast room, the sun has infiltrated the lace curtains and turned the entire table into a still life. Soft-boiled eggs, marmalade jars, and toasted crumpets arranged with devotional reverence. And at the center, yes, a pineapple centerpiece, again. Only this one is different, less regal, more apologetic. A backup pineapple, the understudy. You sit near Georgiana, who is buttering toast with the focused energy of someone performing minor surgery. She glances at the pineapple, then at you, and raises an eyebrow. "We meet again," she says, as though greeting a recurring villain in a serialized drama. The other guests trickle in, one by one, all of them a little frayed around the edges, crushed collars, puffy eyes, the occasional yawn disguised as a sigh of philosophical reflection. Lady Cresswell has a napkin tucked into her collar, like a medieval knight about to joust with a sausage. She surveys the room with the air of someone who knows exactly how many pineapple-related social disasters have occurred in the last decade. Eloise enters last, once again composed, but in a different way. Looser now, less host, more human. She pours herself a cup of tea and murmurs, "It's survived the night." You ask if she means the pineapple. She glances at it. "No," she says, "the carpet. Apparently, someone spilled a glass of cordial during last night's grand exit, narrowly avoiding both pineapple and piano bench. Historians still argue," she adds, "whether Aunt Mildred's clumsiness is genuine or a strategic form of revenge." Everyone chuckles. Even the toast seems to relax. Breakfast conversation is softer, more honest. People admit to things now. Forgotten names, misread menus, small wardrobe malfunctions. There's a kind of morning amnesty. Georgiana admits she wore mismatched earrings the entire night and no one noticed. Or perhaps they did, and simply thought it was a statement, she muses. "I accidentally addressed someone's wife as their mother," a gentleman confesses, groaning. "Easily done," replies Lady Cresswell. "Worse things have happened in front of a trifle." The pineapple watches over all of it, a symbol now not of pressure, but of collective survival. it occurs to you that maybe the pineapple's purpose wasn't intimidation. Maybe it was unity, a shared absurdity, a prop in the long-running theatrical production of English social ritual. After breakfast, you drift outside. The air is cool, the lawn freshly mown. Dew clings to every blade of grass like nature's own social anxiety. You wander toward the orangery, where smaller pineapples are supposedly being coaxed into existence. A gardener nods to you politely and returns to misting the leaves of something unpronounceable. You spot several young pineapples growing, each wearing a strange little hat made of clay and straw. Protection from chill and pride alike. They are small, earnest, slightly ridiculous. You imagine each one eventually being plucked and placed upon some future dinner table, where it will inspire a similar cascade of micro-crises and veiled commentary. And yet, you find the thought comforting. These fruits, grown with so much care and expectation, don't know what awaits them. The candlelight, the gossip, the pressure to impress, and the certainty they'll never be tasted. You feel a kinship. As you turn back toward the house, you catch one last glimpse of the breakfast pineapple through the window. It's being wrapped in linen, prepared for travel. Perhaps a guest requested it. Perhaps it's being sent as a token of esteem. Or a threat. It's hard to say. You whisper a soft farewell. You've grown fond of the thing. And just before re-entering the house, Georgiana's voice echoes in your head. Maybe we're all just pineapples in disguise, difficult to peel, a bit spiky, and trying very hard to be worth the journey. The carriage rocks gently as it carries you away from the manor. You've said your goodbyes, politely, of course, with all the right inflections, and enough thank yous to stock a gift shop. Eloise kissed your cheek and whispered, "Next time, we're doing a picnic. No fruit, symbols." Georgiana handed you a biscuit wrapped in wax paper and said nothing, just winked. You sit now among your satchels and travel cloak, your gloves folded in your lap like tired birds. On the seat across from you, nestled beside a hatbox and a small valise, is a parting gift. A pineapple. A real one this time. Not carved, not painted, not smirking. Just a ripe, sweet-smelling fruit, complete with a polite ribbon and a little card. You laugh softly, and the driver likely thinks you're odd, but that's fine. Let him wonder. The countryside drifts by. Hedgerows blur into fields. Sheep blink at you with their existential calm. Somewhere in the near distance, a village bakes bread without realizing it's creating memories. You lean your head against the window. You think about what it means to give someone a pineapple. It's not just a fruit, after all. Not in this strange, rule-heavy world of the Victorians. It's shorthand. It's a wink. It's a challenge. Sometimes it's a trophy. Other times, a warning. Occasionally, it's just a fruit that was on sale, and yet, within its rough exterior and absurd crown, there's something deeply relatable. It's an outsider too, brought across oceans, treated like royalty, and then, if lucky, preserved or passed on, still uneaten. Historians still argue, you recall, whether pineapples were ever truly loved or just tolerated because of what they symbolized. You decide it's both, which brings you to the pineapple's second life. Gossip, not malicious gossip, no. Not the cruel whispers that strip people down, but the performative kind, the interpretive dance of social subtext. A Victorian lady didn't gossip simply to relay information. She shaped it, wrapped it in etiquette, delivered it with a half smile and a subtle sip of tea. And where better to gossip than over something exotic? Pineapples provided a perfect canvas for coded commentary. If a hostess served pineapple in jelly, perhaps she was suggesting her marriage had congealed. If it arrived slightly bruised, maybe it was a nudge toward the reputation of a certain baronet. At the very least, its presence meant something was about to be said without being said. You remember the drawing room, how everyone's eyes drifted to the centerpiece, like it was about to blurt out secrets. The pineapple as the gossiping oracle, less Delphic, more tropical. And let's not forget the accessories. Pineapple motifs popped up everywhere in Victorian decor. There were pineapple-shaped tea caddies, doorknobs, and sugar bowls. To display one was to declare, I can afford both luxury and whimsy. One particularly bold duchess had a chandelier shaped like an upside-down pineapple. Rumour had it, she lit it only when expecting guests she disliked. In some households, placing a pineapple on the hall table was a quiet message. You're welcome, but not for long. And if someone arrived with a pineapple, scandalous. It was a declaration that they too could play the game, that they brought status with them, not borrowed, but owned. You look down at your pineapple again. It's heavy, warm from the sun, and slightly uneven in colour. You run a thumb over its skin, noting the tiny armour plates. It's beautiful in its own jagged way, which makes sense. The Victorians, for all their rules and rigidities, were obsessed with appearances that concealed effort. No one was supposed to admit how hard it was to be graceful, or interesting, or fashionable. You simply had to be. And yet behind closed doors, over pineapples and parlour games, they whispered the truth. Not just about others, but about themselves. Whispers like, I hate embroidery, but I must pretend otherwise. Or, my sister married for oranges, real ones. Even, I would rather speak to a pineapple than my cousin Charles. The carriage jolts gently, and your thoughts bounce along with it. You imagine a woman named Margaret, circa 1853, writing in her diary. It comforts you somehow. To know that behind all the starch and starchier expressions, real people peeked through. Frustrated, cheeky, yearning for softness. People like Eloise and Georgiana, and probably even Lady Cresswell, who likely practiced her disapproving looks in the mirror but still cried at sentimental novels. The pineapple, then, becomes a metaphor for these women. Tough exterior, a little spiky, but inside, sweet, complex, prone to bruising. You look back out the window as your journey continues. Clouds have begun gathering. Not ominous, just lazy and theatrical. The sort that makes the sky feel like it's in costume. A sheep sneezes in the distance. You imagine it doing so daintily with a lace handkerchief. The pineapple rests beside you, and in its quiet way, it says everything. By the time you reach the town, the air has changed. It's heavier here, not unpleasant, just thicker with movement. The scent of coal smoke clings to the breeze, mingling with yeast from a nearby bakery and the faint tang of damp cobblestones. Wheels clatter, hooves echo, and voices layer over each other like a slightly out-of-sync orchestra. You step out of the carriage, pineapple in hand, and immediately feel its presence draw attention. Two boys pause their game of marbles to squint at it. A passing greengrocer raises a brow. An older woman mutters something about colonial fruit nonsense as she shuffles past with her shopping basket. You cradle it closer, like a newborn or a manifesto. Your destination lies just down the high street, a small but respectable boarding house with green shutters and the faint smell of lavender tucked into its wallpaper. Mrs. Arkwright, the landlady, greets you with a conspiratorial smile that suggests she knows everything that's ever happened within a 300-yard radius. And what, she says, glancing at your fruity companion, have we brought back with us? You tell her it's a gift. She nods knowingly. Best kind. Can't be returned and always starts a conversation. She leads you to a second floor, room overlooking the street. Simple, warm, and freshly turned down, it feels immediately yours. You set the pineapple on the windowsill, where it sits like a silent observer, ready to judge carriages and courting rituals with impartial curiosity. Later, you find yourself at the town's lending library, a charmingly dusty place where time has agreed to pause and browse. You ask for books on fruit, and the librarian, without blinking, leads you to an entire shelf. Pineapples, it turns out, have their own section. You flip through pages filled with diagrams of cultivation methods, etchings of pineapples attending, royal banquets, and, somewhat inexplicably, a satirical cartoon of a pineapple being knighted. Victorian society's obsession with the fruit went well beyond dinner party bravado. There were pineapple-themed dinner services, complete with pineapple-shaped gravy boats, pineapple-shaped pocket watches, a wildly unsuccessful pineapple perfume called Tropic Envy, which one reviewer described as a blend of wine, cat, and self-regard. Even Queen Victoria herself reportedly enjoyed pineapple ice. Served not often, mind you, it was still expensive, but frequently enough that it entered court gossip. The phrase cool as pineapple ice was briefly fashionable among ladies who secretly loathed each other. And if you were especially wealthy or just exceptionally delusional, you might even rent a pineapple for an event. Yes, rent, and enterprising. Few realized that what people really wanted was the look of pineapple prestige, not the fruit itself. So they charged a fee for temporary pineapple possession. The fruit would appear at your table, gleaming with borrowed glory, and be returned the next day for another debut elsewhere. Historians still argue whether anyone ever tried to bite into one before returning it. Some say yes. Some say they were publicly shamed for it. Others claim it led to silent wars between hostesses. You believe all three. Back in your room that evening, the pineapple catches the last blush of sunset, turning golden like a treasure in a fairy tale, or a very confused piece of decor. You sit beside it and open your journal. You begin to write, not about the parties or the parlor games, but about the women behind the pineapples. Women who couldn't vote, who couldn't own property without a husband's signature, who were expected to smile through discomfort and embroider the edges of their ambition. Women who passed notes in cookbooks and hid jokes in needlepoint. Women who spoke truths with fruit. You remember Lady Cresswell's cold glance, which now feels a bit more like armor than disdain. You recall Eloise's exhausted elegance, her ability to steer conversation like a gondolier in an emotional canal, and Georgiana, who wore mismatched earrings and didn't care. The pineapple becomes something else, not just gossip's companion, but rebellion's mascot, a subtle, fragrant form of resistance. Outside, the town begins to settle into its evening. Rhythm, lamps lit, shutters closed. A lullaby of horse hooves and hearth fire crackles. You take one last look at the fruit on the sill, still whole, still silent, still waiting to be misunderstood. And you smile, because now you understand it. The next morning arrives dressed in fog. Not dramatic, swirling Dickensian fog, just the sleepy, cottony kind that wraps chimneys and softens cartwheels. It seeps into your bones like warm milk, and makes the world feel like it's being gently erased, one hedgerow at a time. You rise slowly, stretch, and check on your pineapple. Still there, still impassive, still projecting the strange aura of something that's lived a far more eventful life than you. You decide to take it for a walk. Yes, really. You wrap it in a scarf, one of those soft paisley numbers that feels more personality than fabric, and tuck it into your satchel with the crown poking out like a ridiculous hat. Down the cobbled street you go, past the bakery, the tobacconist, and a tailor who appears to be arguing with a mannequin. People notice. One child points and says, "Mum, that person's got a pineapple in their bag," to which the mother replies, "It's probably a metaphor." You end up in the town's public gardens, where primroses line gravel paths and ducks loaf around like unpaid extras in a nature documentary. You find a bench, you sit, the pineapple rests beside you, and you think about display, because in Victorian England, display was everything. The pineapple was perhaps the purest form of this. You didn't just own it, you showed it. You curated it, like a conversation piece with vitamin C. Banquets, especially among the upper class, often revolved around the pièce de résistance, a decorative center item meant to impress, intimidate, or inspire envy. And nothing said, "I have arrived," quite like a pineapple dressed in sugared violets, resting on a velvet stand. But the obsession trickled down, as these things do. Even middle-class households would invest in pineapple-patterned wallpapers or stencils for pie crusts. Decorative prints showed pineapples alongside biblical verses, implying the fruit had theological merit. Some clergymen even used it in sermons, calling it God's ornate parable of reward through effort, though that might have been a stretch. One particularly odd custom emerged in a coastal town: pineapple-shaped weather vanes. They didn't rotate any better than standard ones, but they looked more sophisticated, which was the point. Historians still argue whether any of this reflected genuine admiration for the fruit's taste, or if it was simply the 19th century equivalent of putting a celebrity on a t-shirt. But for many, the pineapple was more than status. It was aspiration. In a world of tight corsets and tighter budgets, it was a promise of elsewhere, of tropical breezes and golden abundance, of something exotic visiting your grey-windowed world for a fleeting hour. Even recipe books leaned into this fantasy. One popular cookbook, Mrs. Yarrow's Practical Dainties for the Aspiring Hostess, dedicated an entire chapter to pineapple allusions. There were pineapple-shaped puddings, pineapple-flavoured ices made with gooseberries, and a truly suspicious entry called Mock Pineapple Roast that involved breadcrumbs, lemon zest, and a hopeful attitude. Some cooks got creative. They soaked turnips in rum and pineapple vinegar, then candied them, creating what became known as the poor woman's tropic. It fooled no one, but the effort, admirable. Back on your bench, you look at your own, pineapple again, and wonder what sort of illusions it's been part of. Was it ever the centerpiece of a sugar banquet, carried into a drawing room by a footman who rolled his eyes when no one was looking? Was it bought for a sweetheart, or borrowed for a poetry reading, or, more likely, rescued from being turned into chutney at the last minute? You decide it deserves a legacy, so you take out your notebook, and under the heading Pineapple Adventures, you begin to write a list, not of facts, but of imagined lives. Names it might have had, parties it might have attended, romantic entanglements with other fruit it might have endured. Sir Pitherington Sweets, retired naval pineapple, Miss Goldina of the Lemon Grove, Baron Corhard of the Sticky Isles. Ridiculous, yes. Delightful, absolutely. And somewhere in the absurdity, you find the essence of why the Victorians loved this fruit. It gave them permission to dream beyond their drapes, to imagine a world they couldn't visit in a form they could admire, taste, and, if need be, gossip about. Even as they repressed feelings, obeyed impossible etiquette, and worried whether their lamp oil smelled gauche, the pineapple sat at the centre of it all, asking only to be noticed. Which it always was. A pigeon lands on the bench. It looks at the pineapple, then at you, then back at the pineapple. You nod solemnly. It nods back. The world makes sense again. You return to the boarding house late that afternoon with your pineapple and your list of pineapple personas safely tucked into your coat pocket. Mrs. Arkwright greets you with a small plate of shortbread and a look that says, "You've been up," to something mildly scandalous, and I respect that. She eyes the pineapple, now slightly dulled from the walk, but still defiant in its leafy crown. "Still with us, I see," she says. You set it gently on the sideboard beside a dusty vase and a porcelain cat with judgmental eyes. That evening, the parlour fills with guests. You hadn't expected this, some kind of poetry night, or perhaps just an excuse for everyone to sip weak tea and complain about chimney sweeps. There's a woman reading Tennyson by the hearth, a gentleman with a monocle that keeps slipping off, a quiet young man whose cough is suspiciously theatrical, as if auditioning for a tragic death. You sit by the window, pineapple resting in your lap like a lapdog that smells faintly of foreign soil. And then she walks in. You don't know her name yet, but her hat is made of woven velvet, and she carries an aura of confident eccentricity. She spots your pineapple instantly. "Oh, marvellous," she says, making her way to you. "Is it conversational or simply decorative?" You blink. "Bit of both." "Excellent," she replies, settling beside you. "I once brought a starfruit to a funeral. It was a mistake, but it taught me something about timing. Her name, it turns out, is Maribel. She's a teacher of watercolor technique and of what she calls mid-tier secrets. Her laugh is quiet but firm, like someone who's used it to disarm many a snob. She doesn't bat an eye when you tell her about your pineapple persona list. In fact, she adds one. Lady Prickles of the Tropical Regiment. You nearly choke on your tea. You both agree it sounds like someone who'd have had a scandal involving a botanist and an exploding marmalade. Conversation moves easily from fruit to flirtations, to family, and finally, to the absurd social rules that govern this pineapple-obsessed age. You know, she says, lowering her voice slightly. I once attended a dinner where the hostess had trained her staff to whisper pineapple facts between courses, like... She once had the butler say, "Did you know the Hawaiian word is halakahiki?" as he poured the gravy. It was surreal. You laugh, a full, unladylike, unapproved laugh, and you feel lighter, because under all the starch and ceremony, these gatherings are not really about the food, or the poetry, or the pineapples. They're about finding the others, the ones who understand, the ones who know that pineapple wallpaper isn't just gaudy, it's code. That the fruit on the table is less about fiber and more about freedom. That sitting beside someone with a satchel full of fruity metaphors might just be the highlight of your month. Historians still argue whether these subtle rebellions, the fruit, the wordplay, the quietly mocking centerpieces, amounted to true social critique or were simply distractions. Some call it resistance. Others call it survival. Most agree it was better than embroidery circles. The night continues. Someone sings something vaguely mournful about chimney soot. A gentleman quotes Byron with more confidence than accuracy. A young girl reads a poem about love and pastry. It's charming and terrible. And Maribel whispers, "You know, if pineapples could gossip, imagine the things they'd say." You glance at yours. It's still. But there's something in its angle, its slightly smug tilt, that makes you wonder. When you retire to your room, you place it back on the windowsill. The moonlight kisses its spiky head. The town hums softly. Below, you sit for a while longer, scribbling notes in your journal. Tonight, the pineapple was seen, heard, understood. You pause and add, as was I. Morning sunlight slides through your lace curtains like a polite but determined intruder. You blink awake, groggy from dreams that involved pineapples giving speeches in Parliament, and Maribel leading a march of fruit-bearing women down Pall Mall. You make a mental note to ease up on the clotted cream. Your pineapple greets you from its usual perch on the windowsill. It's hard to tell, but you think it looks pleased, or at least smug. It's definitely leaning more left than it did yesterday, which feels like a stance. You cradle it gently and bring it to the wash basin, dabbing it with a soft cloth, like it's a royal infant recovering from a long voyage. Today, you're attending a luncheon, not just any luncheon. This one is hosted by the Ladies' Temperance and Culinary Curiosity Society, an exhausting name for what is essentially an excuse to taste test jelly molds and issue carefully phrased judgments. You pack the pineapple, of course. It would be rude not to. At the gathering, held in a sunlit conservatory filled with the scent of boiled sugar and floral ambition, the pineapple becomes an instant celebrity. It's placed center stage on a cut-glass pedestal, framed by bowls of pickled cabbage and a faintly quivering blancmange. The women orbit it like moths around a particularly colonial flame. Lady Arbuthnot, who once mistook a mango for an eggplant and swore off foreign nonsense ever since, eyes it with suspicion. "That's a very forward-looking pineapple," she mutters. You nod solemnly. It knows things. Maribel is there too, of course. She arrives slightly late, draped in lavender and wearing a brooch shaped like a tiny spoon. She winks at you across the room. Soon, the pineapple gossip begins. Not about your pineapple exactly, though you catch murmurs, but about pineapples in general. About who bought one for a soiree but couldn't afford coal the following week. About that one poor cousin who rented one for a dinner party, only for it to fall off the carriage and be crushed under a lamplighter's wheel. Apparently, the funeral was tasteful. Historians still argue, one woman begins between sips of elderflower cordial, whether the pineapple craze started because of actual demand or because someone's butler mispronounced plantain at court. Her companion frowns. I thought it was introduced by Captain Cook. That was the kangaroo. Are you sure? No. The conversation drifts, but you catch another thread about pineapple carvers. Yes, carvers who were hired by wealthy households to chisel elaborate fruit sculptures. Some pineapples were turned into boats, lions, or even elaborate portraits of Queen Victoria herself, though the likeness was interpretive. One London socialite allegedly commissioned a life-sized bust of her deceased husband entirely in pineapple slices. It lasted 4 hours before collapsing into sticky ruin, which, some whispered, was how he'd have wanted to go. You listen, amused and increasingly amazed, because in this refined space, full of lemon curd and delicate disapproval, the pineapple is doing what it's always done best, breaking the ice. It's a talking point that can be safely ridiculous, a novelty that makes critique feel clever instead of cruel, a way to say, I'm in on the joke, without admitting to making one. And that's no small thing, because Victorian etiquette is exhausting. There are rules about gloves, rules about how to hold a teacup, never loop your finger through the handle, that's practically treason, and rules about how many compliments are too many. 3 is flattery, 4 is considered a marriage proposal. In this tightly corseted world, humour has to sneak in sideways, often through objects, especially fruit. You catch Maribel again, now engaged in a conversation with a woman who claims pineapples emit calming pheromones. I keep one in my bath, she says, next to the mint poultice. Maribel nods, deadpan. Mine gives advice. You nearly inhale your biscuit. Later, as the luncheon winds down, someone suggests a group portrait. The hostess insists the pineapple be included. She places it on a silver cake stand right in the foreground. You and Maribel flank it, and the others arrange themselves like curious ministers. The photographer adjusts his contraption, tosses a blanket over his head, and says, "Say tropics." Everyone obliges. The pineapple does not. But somehow, it's still the most expressive thing in the photo. Back home that evening, you pin the photo to your wall, and as the gaslights hum and your eyes grow heavy, you glance once more at your fruity companion. This pineapple has attended more events than most debutantes. It has made conversation, created scandal, and absorbed more whispered confidences than the parish confessional. And yet, it remains mute, watchful, steady. A perfect gossip, really. You wake up the next morning to a knock on your door and the arrival of a letter. Not a summons, thankfully. No pineapple-related misdemeanors. Just a creamy envelope bearing the embossed monogram of Lady Wickham Frost. She is known in certain circles as the Grand Pineapple Matron, though never to her face. Inside, the invitation reads, "You raise an eyebrow." This is no ordinary invitation. Wickham Hall is where trends go to be baptized. If a lady breathes a thought within its conservatories, it becomes a whisper across the country within a week. To be invited is a sign that someone somewhere has noticed you, and not in the "who let her in" kind of way. You carefully place your pineapple in your satchel, alongside a folded parasol and 3 emergency compliments, just in case. Wickham Hall is all stained glass and sun-drenched tiles, the sort of place where even the ivy is well behaved. A butler leads you past a marble fountain shaped like a weeping cherub into a solarium, where Lady Wickham Frost sits surrounded by a half-circle of women, each with their own pineapples. Some fresh, some slightly wilted. One made entirely of embroidery. "Delightful," she says when she sees yours. "I do love a classic." You nod, uncertain whether she means the pineapple or your outfit. The meeting begins. No one claps. That would be gauche. Instead, a young woman reads aloud a recent Gazette article titled, "The Pineapple's Role in Gentlewomanly Fortitude." It's a ponderous piece. Lots of phrases like fruited dignity and prickled resistance. Then Lady Wickham Frost clears her throat. Let us discuss symbolism. The room leans in. She speaks slowly, as if each word were hand-stitched. A pineapple is not merely a fruit. It is a vessel. It contains not just juice, but meaning. Someone murmurs, profound. You resist the urge to ask if it also contains potassium. The discussion drifts toward the metaphorical. Some say the pineapple represents hospitality, says a woman in blue gloves. But surely it also represents guarded sweetness. Look at those spikes. You must earn your way inside. There's a murmur of agreement. Another woman, a retired opera singer, claims she once cured a bout of romantic despair by slicing a pineapple into tiny hearts and serving it to herself on a tray of silver spoons. Maribel, who has snuck in beside you once again, whispers, I once used a pineapple to prop open a stubborn window. I felt like a tropical Hercules. You smile, sipping your tea. Then the discussion turns unexpectedly philosophical. Historians still argue whether the pineapple craze was genuine admiration or sheer hysteria. Lady Wickham Frost muses, tracing a gloved finger along the rim of her teacup. But perhaps it was something more subtle, a rebellion disguised as fashion. You nod slowly, because that feels true. In a world where women are expected to smile, curtsy, agree and flatter, adopting a symbol of wildness, a fruit that comes from a storm-racked jungle and wears armor, feels quietly radical. The pineapple says, yes, I will attend your tea. Party, but I might also overthrow your metaphorical empire. And in these tightly laced parlors, that's a thrill. After the meeting ends, Lady Wickham Frost approaches you. Your pineapple, she says, eyeing it carefully, has presence. Thank you, you say, trying not to blush. Have you considered entering it in the Illustrated Fruit Review's annual showcase? You blink. That's a thing? She smiles. It is now. I'm chairing the committee. Outside, as the sun dips behind the hedges, you and Maribel walk back through the iron gates. She's humming something that sounds suspiciously like a sea shanty. I've never seen so many serious women talking about fruit with that much conviction, you say. She grins. That's Victorian society for you. We can't vote, but we can monologue about citrus until the end of time. Back home, you place the pineapple in a bowl of polished apples. It looks regal, slightly bored, but regal. You stroke its spiky leaves and whisper, you might be getting famous. It doesn't answer, but somehow it feels like it knows. The days following the Wickham Hall summit carry a peculiar sense of momentum. It's as though the air itself has shifted, heavier with meaning, scented faintly with citrus. Your pineapple, once just an eccentric ornament in a corner of your sitting room, now seems to vibrate faintly with a new importance. Not literally, though you do double-check once or twice. You begin preparing for the Illustrated Fruit Review's annual showcase with all the solemnity of a general mapping a siege. There is no formal application. You must simply present, as in, show up, pineapple in hand, preferably with a backstory that can be expressed in one paragraph or less, and still move a dowager to tears. Maribel suggests a silk-lined display basket. You nod thoughtfully and then spend an hour embroidering tiny pineapples onto the cushion, each one more wonky than the last. They look like tiny hedgehogs, but no one will see them up close, you reason. Hopefully. Meanwhile, the pineapple receives spa-level attention. You gently mist it with rosewater. You comb its top knot. You even dab a little beeswax on its rind to bring out that champion-worthy sheen. One morning, a note arrives via messenger. It reads, no signature, just the stamp of the review, 2 crossed paring knives beneath a fruit bowl. You wonder aloud, are we in a novel? Is this fruit espionage? The pineapple offers no comment. On the day of the review, you dress with care. Nothing too loud. You don't want to outshine the fruit, but elegant enough to imply that you and your pineapple are a cohesive unit. Maribel shows up in a dress embroidered with pears and a hat shaped vaguely like a cantaloupe. You're going to do brilliantly, she says, adjusting the angle of your pineapple ever so slightly. Just don't let it roll off the judging table. That happened to Lady Balcombe last year. Terrible scandal. The review is held at the Royal Conservatory, a high-arched glass palace filled with light and polite ambition. Inside, fruits of all shapes and pedigrees are displayed like small miracles. There are apples carved with tiny portraits of Queen Victoria. There's a banana shaped like a seahorse. One woman has painstakingly arranged grapes into the likeness of the Tower of London. You find your designated spot, a small pedestal lined with velvet, and set your pineapple down gently like offering a sacred relic. A judge passes, nodding. "Strong rind," he murmurs. "Good symmetry." You feel oddly proud. While you wait for judging to begin, you wander the exhibits. You overhear a heated argument about whether kumquats qualify as expressive. You spot a woman trying to flirt using only pomegranate metaphors. It's not working, but she's giving it her all. Nearby, someone whispers. Historians still argue whether the showcase was rigged in favor of an earl's cousin's quince. You're not sure if that's true, but you want it to be. Judging begins with a low chime. A row of dignified, stern-faced men and women, most wearing spectacles and at least one fruit-themed accessory, move slowly down the rows, clipboard in hand, expressions unreadable. When they reach your pineapple, there's a pause. Then, mature, confident, a hint of rebellion in the tilt. One judge jots something, another sniffs thoughtfully. You don't breathe the entire time. Later, you stand beside Maribel in the gallery while the awards are announced. She squeezes your arm. "If we lose, we riot." You smile, but you mean it. Third place goes to a cherimoya sculpted into a model of Westminster Abbey. Second, to a guava dressed in miniature Tudor robes. And first, well, it doesn't go to your pineapple, but it does receive a special citation for fruit most likely to disrupt social hierarchies while remaining visually appealing. You feel an immense, sleepy joy, like winning the quietest revolution in British horticultural history. Afterwards, Lady Wickham Frost finds you in the foyer. "You handled yourself well," she says. "So did your companion." "Thank you," you say. "Have you considered going to print?" she adds cryptically. There's a growing market for reflective essays on fruit-related phenomena. You nod, as if this is a perfectly ordinary suggestion. Maribel nudges you on the way home. "You're going to be insufferable now, aren't you?" "Only slightly," you reply, adjusting the ribbon around your pineapple. That night, you sit by your window, watching the moon bathe your prize-winning fruit in gentle light. You whisper, "You did good, little one." It doesn't respond, but for the briefest moment, it seems to lean just slightly closer. The week after the showcase unfolds like a dream stitched together with lace and laughter. You and your pineapple are invited everywhere. Not because you're important, exactly, but because you're interesting. And in Victorian society, those are two very different currencies. Importance buys you a seat at the table. Intrigue gets you whispered about when you leave it. Your mornings begin with shortbread and invitations. Tea with the Duchess of Cornbrook. A salon titled Fruits of Empire, a round table. A walking tour of historic vegetable markets, hosted by an academic who once wrote an ode to a cabbage. Maribel calls it your pineapple period. One afternoon, as you sit in a sun-drenched garden balancing a teacup on one knee and your pineapple on the other, you find yourself being interviewed by a journalist from the lady's literary fronde. She has thick spectacles and a notebook as long as your forearm. "So," she begins, "what do you believe the pineapple means?" You hesitate. Then you say, "It's a paradox, isn't it? Tropical yet proper, sweet yet spiky, social currency that spoils in a week." She scribbles furiously. Historians still argue whether Victorian women adopted the pineapple as rebellion or fashion, you add, because you know it'll sound good in print. That night, your quote appears verbatim under the headline, "The Subversive Spines of Society, One Woman's Fruited Rebellion." You read it aloud to the pineapple. It doesn't react, but you swear it looks slightly smug. Later that week, an invitation arrives that changes everything. Now that's a new dress code. You ask Maribel what attire conversational means, and she simply responds, probably velvet. The Marquis of Everdon is a strange figure, part scholar, part dilettante, part mystery wrapped in an ascot. He is known to host salons that start with dinner and end with impromptu ghost readings or reenactments of obscure treaties using finger puppets. You arrive at his townhouse at precisely 7, pineapple polished and hair appropriately tousled. The room is a patchwork of characters. Diplomats, playwrights, an inventor who claims he can carbonate custard, and at least 2 people who are clearly spying on one another, but pretending not to. Dinner is elaborate but unpretentious. You sit between a botanist from Barbados and a silent woman who only communicates in semaphore using her fan. The Marquis himself is charming and just slightly odd. He raises his glass halfway through the soup course. "To the pineapple," he declares. "May it remain ornamental and ominous in equal measure." Everyone laughs. During dessert, candied hibiscus on clove ice, you find yourself drawn into a conversation about status symbols. The Marquis leans forward and says, "What I like about the pineapple is that it refuses to be purely decorative. The moment you eat it, you destroy it. That's commitment." You nod, like throwing a masquerade where the masks dissolve at midnight. "Exactly," he says, beaming. "Though I once hosted a party where the guests dissolved at midnight. But that was a metaphor. Mostly." Later, over port, he asks to see your pineapple. You present it with a practiced flourish. He examines it closely. Marvelous patina. Slightly overripe. Perfect. Then softly, you do realize you're starting to affect things. You tilt your head. Affect what? "The balance," he says, vague but amused. "Pineapples are becoming more than a trend. They're becoming an attitude. There are murmurs." You blink. "Murmurs?" "Small ones," he assures. "Nothing treasonous, yet." You glance at your fruit. Could it be true? Could you, and this spiky tropical emissary, be starting a quiet revolution of your own? Back home, you tuck the pineapple into its silk-lined basket. It's starting to lose its shine, the tips of its leaves browning just a touch. You stroke the edge of its rind gently. "We're going to need a plan," you murmur. It sits in perfect silence. But somehow, it feels like the beginning of something big. You spend the next morning rereading the article from Lady's Literary Fronde while sipping tea that tastes vaguely of rose petals and colonial gilt. It still feels absurd. Your words, printed and bound, floating across parlours and bathhouses, on thin, perfumed pages. Outside, your pineapple rests by the window, soaking in what little sun breaks through the sooty London fog. You've begun to worry about it. The rind is softening. A few of the lower fronds have curled, brown at the edges. You hold it gently in your lap, as if it were a sleeping kitten or a small, prickly secret. "You're fading," you whisper, "but we still have time." The invitation arrives around noon. Less a letter, more a summons. Heavy cardstock, creamy and embossed, sealed in wax bearing a pineapple with a monocle. You blink twice. Maribel, upon hearing it, claps her hands. "Oh, you must go. That's the most ridiculous sentence I've heard all week." You don your least itchy tweed and tuck your pineapple into a basket lined with lavender sachets. The building is tucked into a quiet square off Bloomsbury, one of those places that looks like it hasn't exhaled since 1720. Inside, a crowd has gathered. Quiet, intense, a little fruity in every sense of the word. There's an air of mourning or reverence. Several attendees cradle aging pomegranates or spotted bananas like religious icons. You spot one woman with a fig swaddled in silk. The lecture begins. A tall man with a thundercloud beard stands at a podium beside a lemon that's halfway to mummified. "Friends," he begins, "tonight we address the inevitable. Fruit fades." There are nods, one muffled sob. He continues, weaving a tale of fruit through time, of Roman generals who wept when their peaches turned, of early Buddhists meditating on the impermanence of plums. The pineapple, he intones, is no different, regal in youth, dignified in decline. You glance at yours. Regal, yes. Dignified. You squint. The sheen is gone. The fronds droop like overused fans, but it still sits upright, proud in its slow surrender to entropy. Historians still argue, the lecturer says, whether Victorian society preferred eternal symbols or temporary beauty. The pineapple, decaying, edible, imported, forced them to confront that paradox. A woman to your right whispers, they tried to lacquer one once. To preserve it forever, it cracked in the winter air. You imagine your own pineapple, encased in amber, immortal but untouchable. When the lecture ends, there is a moment of silence, not for the speaker, but for the fruit, all of it. Everywhere. Outside, you and your pineapple sit on a bench under a gas lamp. Maribel finds you there, wrapped in a shawl and existential dread. You look like a governess who's just realized the children are ghosts, she says. You nod solemnly. I think I'm grieving. For the pineapple? For its possibilities. She sits beside you, pulling a tiny orange from her coat. Maybe it's not about preserving it forever. Maybe it's about giving it a glorious run before the mold sets in. You stare at her. That's surprisingly poetic. She shrugs. I read a lot of leaflets. Back at home, you set your pineapple in a place of honor, on your mantle, next to a tiny ceramic bust of Queen Charlotte and a snow globe shaped like a haddock. You light a candle beside it, not for drama, but for warmth. You stroke its fronds once, just once. Then, you begin to write. A manifesto, a memoir, a fruit-based opera. You're not sure yet, but you do know this. You and that pineapple, softening, slouching, quietly potent, have changed something, not just in yourself, but in those strange little circles of ladies and lords and silent fan communicators who now know your name. The fruit may be fading, but the story, oh, the story is just ripening. The morning after your visit to the society, of fruited aesthetics dawns grey and soft, the kind of day that feels like a thick blanket draped over London. The fog swirls gently around your windowsill where your pineapple sits, its leaves drooping just a touch more. You trudge to your writing desk, the notebook open to a blank page, waiting for your thoughts to bloom like timid spring flowers. As you settle in, a peculiar feeling settles over you. A sense that your pineapple is no longer just a fruit, but a symbol of something larger. Not just the peculiar status of tropical imports, but a mirror reflecting the subtle shifts of Victorian society itself. You write about the delicate dance Victorian ladies performed, balancing propriety with rebellion, the public and the private, the stiff corset and the sly smile behind the fan. The pineapple becomes a metaphor for that dance, prickly on the outside yet sweet beneath, exotic but domestic, ostentatious yet ephemeral. Historians still argue whether the pineapple's popularity was primarily about social signaling or a genuine fascination with the unfamiliar. You lean toward the latter, though you know both are true, tangled like the vines in a greenhouse. Midway through your writing, Maribel appears at the door, waving a freshly baked pineapple tart. Thought you might want a snack or some inspiration. You accept gratefully, savoring the soft crust and warm, fragrant filling. She sits beside you, eyes twinkling. I heard the Marquis is hosting another gathering next week. Something about the Empire's hidden fruits. You raise an eyebrow. Hidden fruits? Apparently, it's not just pineapples, making waves. There are rumors of other tropical treasures causing a stir. You think of the mangoes you spotted last market day, bright and mysterious, and the passion fruit with its sharp floral scent. Your mind wanders to all the conversations that could happen, the stories waiting to be told, the gossip that might ripple through society like a gentle storm. Later, you take your pineapple for a slow walk in the garden. The leaves brush softly, against your fingers. It feels oddly comforting, like holding a secret handshake with history. You pause by a bed of lavender and think about how scent, texture, and taste weave themselves into the fabric of memory. Could this humble fruit truly hold the power to connect strangers across time and place? As the sun dips low, casting long shadows, you wonder if you'll ever look at a pineapple and perhaps even gossip the same way again. You smile to yourself. Probably not. Evenings settle quietly into a new rhythm. You find yourself lingering longer at social gatherings, pineapple in tow, more curious than cautious. The fruit is no longer just an accessory or conversation starter. It's becoming a passport to moments both bizarre and beautiful. At the Marquis's last salon, you overheard a conversation about the peculiar rituals surrounding pineapples in other parts of the empire. In Barbados, for instance, the pineapple was once so treasured that farmers would protect the ripening fruit with tiny wooden fences, miniature fortresses for a spiky treasure. You imagine the delicate hands constructing these wooden walls, much like the ladies of London delicately guarding their reputations. Maribel shares an obscure tale, a Victorian-era prank involving a hollowed pineapple filled with feathers, set to surprise an unsuspecting guest at a garden party. The victim's shriek apparently echoed for miles, though historians still argue whether it was a one-time joke or part of a secret society's initiation rites. You laugh quietly, imagining the solemn faces of the upper class suddenly flapping feather bows around like startled birds. That night, you dream of the pineapple's journey, plucked from tropical heat, shipped across oceans, encased in crates marked fragile, and finally placed into the delicate hands of English society. The voyage mirrors your own transition, from curious onlooker to reluctant insider. At home, the pineapple rests on your writing desk, its presence grounding you as you draft letters to new acquaintances. You carefully word your notes, balancing curiosity with the era's expected modesty. "Dear Lady Emmeline," one begins, "I hope this note finds you well amidst the swirl of spring blossoms and social intrigue." You pause, glance at the fruit, and smile. It's more than a prop now. It's a confidant. As the days grow warmer, you start to notice the pineapple's decline, the leaves curling further, the skin softening unevenly. Yet, it retains a certain dignity, as if acknowledging the inevitable with Victorian stoicism. You recall a phrase from one of the Marquis's earlier speeches: "To embrace decay is to honor life itself." Perhaps you think, that's the most enduring gossip of all. Spring has fully taken hold of the city now. The damp chill has given way to blossoms peeking out from hedgerows, and the occasional beam of sunlight that makes you squint like someone unused to optimism. You find yourself writing by the open window, your once vibrant pineapple perched beside a potted fern, its crown sagging like an overworked governess. The fruit is fading fast. You consider whether to bid it farewell with dignity, a garden burial perhaps, with a few words read from Tropical Imports Quarterly, or a quiet composting, which feels both respectful and environmentally aware. But you don't act on it just yet. Instead, you take it out for one more outing. The destination, a lesser-known salon hosted by Lady Parnassia Thistlecroft, an eccentric, who famously trained her cockatoo to recite snippets of Shakespeare, and whose parlour features more palm fronds than actual furniture. Her invitation read simply, "You show up with your pineapple under one arm and a curious sense of peace." The room is filled with writers, artists, botanists, one man who claims to be a fruit clairvoyant, and an unnervingly quiet child holding a jackfruit like a weapon. Lady Parnassia, clad in silk robes patterned with climbing vines, begins the discussion. "The pineapple," she intones, "is more than a tropical oddity. It is a contradiction, imported, yet central, edible, yet untouchable, popular, yet misunderstood." You nod slowly, realizing she's describing not just the pineapple, but Victorian womanhood itself. Someone chimes in, "Historians still argue whether its popularity was accidental or manufactured by clever colonial propaganda." A chorus of thoughtful murmurs follows. You speak softly, almost to yourself. Maybe it's both. Maybe that's what makes it so useful. For gossip, for symbolism, for performance. There's a pause. Lady Parnassia claps once. Yes, it is performance. That's why it sits on our mantles, not our plates. By evening's end, you're outside, under a gas lamp, sipping weak lemonade, your pineapple balanced on the railing. The other guests drift off into the night, still whispering about fruit. You feel tired, but not the heavy kind. The kind that follows a long walk through a strange museum, where everything made a little more sense than it should have. At home, you finally place the pineapple in a small wooden bowl. You light a candle beside it and say nothing, because somehow you don't need to. The days grow longer, and the sun lingers just a bit later in the sky, casting golden streaks across your writing desk each afternoon. The pineapple, your noble companion through parlours, salons, whispered rumours, and accidental philosophy, is very clearly reaching its twilight. Its crown slouches now with a kind of theatrical flair, as though bowing before its final curtain. The skin has dimmed from vibrant gold to a muted amber, with small splotches that look like age spots on a once-fabled dowager. And though you know its best days are behind it, you can't quite bring yourself to say goodbye. So you do what any respectable Victorian lady with latent sentimentality and too many hours to fill would do. You start a scrapbook. You label the first page with flair. The Social Life of One Pineapple, a memoir in clippings. There's the announcement from Ladies' Literary Frond, carefully snipped and pasted. Beside it, a faint watercolour sketch from a street artist who once captured you and your fruit in a Covent Garden cafe, totally unaware. The resemblance to the actual pineapple is questionable, but the essence is there. Fronds like a flirtatious hat plume, skin textured like an armoured opera glove. Maribel, of course, contributes a limerick. You laugh so hard you spill ink on your skirt. One page is dedicated to fan messages, little scraps from women you've met at salons, and even a couple of notes from anonymous contributors. One simply reads, "I named mine Beatrice. She helped me leave my husband." You decide not to dig into that. A historian friend sends you a letter with a clipping of an 18th century court painting featuring a pineapple at centre stage, resting on a silver platter between two noblemen with powdered wigs and suspiciously intense expressions. The caption, he reads, "Negotiations concluded, they feasted on fruit. Whether metaphor or literal snack, you can't be sure. Historians still argue whether this was a symbol of alliance or subtle mockery," your friend writes. But either way, the pineapple played the diplomat. Later that week, you receive a small parcel. Inside, a tiny velvet pillow, embroidered with a golden pineapple and the words, "To serve and garnish." There is no note. You take it as a sign, a farewell gift perhaps, from the fruit itself, or maybe from some mysterious admirer who appreciates citrus-themed sentimentality. Either way, you place the pineapple atop the pillow and leave it on your bookshelf like a royal in repose. Your house smells faintly of overripe sweetness now, tinged with lavender and old paper. It's not unpleasant, just nostalgic. You find yourself slowing down, lingering longer over tea, rereading your letters, rewriting your sentences not for clarity, but for cadence. It's not just the pineapple that's softening, it's you. You wake to a cool breeze fluttering, the lace curtain, and before you even rise from bed, you know, today is the day. The pineapple has finally tipped on its little embroidered pillow, the weight of time having shifted its balance. You write it gently, but its leaves no longer spring back. The skin is pocked, the scent faintly fermented. This is the fruit's last act. You could throw it away, quick and efficient, but that feels like discarding a letter unopened, or skipping the last page of a novel. And so you don your walking boots, tie a silk ribbon loosely around your waist, and prepare for a modest farewell ceremony. Maribel meets you at the door, holding a small bundle. "For the occasion," she says, unwrapping a honey cake baked with bits of preserved pineapple. It seemed right. You walk together to the garden behind the chapel. A quiet patch of green where retired lapdogs are sometimes laid to rest beside rose bushes and forgotten saints. You dig a small hole beneath a willow tree, just wide enough for a pineapple-sized secret. There's no audience, no fanfare, just the two of you and the gentle hush of early afternoon. You place the pineapple in the ground like a sleepy relic and murmur a few words. Thank you for your service, for the gossip, for the sticky fingers, for the minor scandals and major metaphors. You were a good fruit. Then, without further ado, you cover it up. Maribel sniffs. I think I'm genuinely going to miss it. You don't reply right away. You just listen to the sound of the leaves rustling overhead, like polite applause. That evening, you write a final entry in your scrapbook. You press a final clipping beside the note, a tiny square of parchment on which someone once doodled a caricature of you, head replaced by a pineapple, and a speech bubble that says, "Did you hear what Lady Windermere did with her footman?" You smile. You don't even remember who drew it. Historians still argue whether the Victorian pineapple craze ever truly ended. You write in your postscript. But in this house, it has passed, with honours. You seal the scrapbook, tie it shut with a velvet ribbon, and place it on the shelf beside your first journal. The next morning, your desk feels empty, but the stillness is not unpleasant. The pineapple is gone. But the habit of noticing strange details, of finding meaning in mundanity, of listening for gossip in the rustle of skirts and fruit baskets, that remains. And you suspect it always will. The weeks that follow feel lighter. It's not just the absence of the pineapple's weight, though admittedly, carrying around a 2-pound tropical fruit in your handbag was never particularly ergonomic. It's the sense of release, like something has shifted in the gravitational pull of your little world. The center of attention is now unoccupied, and you're free to wander away from it. Your days are filled with small rituals. You write letters, sometimes with no recipient. In mind, you sip tea on the balcony and narrate your street's drama to no one in particular. Ah, the linen man is late again. Mrs. Featherstone is not amused. You smile at your own commentary. The pineapple may be buried, but its influence lingers. Maribel returns from a short trip to Bath and brings with her a gift wrapped in oilcloth. It's not a pineapple, she clarifies, but it's got energy. You unwrap it to reveal a cherimoya, a fruit that looks like a pine cone, wearing silk gloves. You raise an eyebrow. What gossip is this one hiding? Maribel smirks. You'll have to find out. The cherimoya, while interesting, lacks the same mystique. It doesn't whisper in social codes or flirt with metaphor. It's just a fruit. Delicious, if oddly textured, but not a protagonist. At Lady Thistlecroft's next gathering, conversation has shifted. Now the rage is moss gardens and bonsai gossip. Who's trimming what, and who overpruned their elm in a fit of poetic despair. You listen, amused, but not compelled. You're between obsessions, and that feels like a kind of freedom. One afternoon, you receive a letter written in faint green ink. It's unsigned. You press it flat and tuck it into your scrapbook. Historians still argue whether the pineapple's symbolic power has truly faded. You muse aloud, setting down your tea. But I think it just goes dormant between generations. A week later, a young cousin visits your house. She's in that wide-eyed phase of girlhood, where everything is fascinating and no story is too ridiculous. She notices the velvet pineapple pillow on the shelf. "What's that for?" she asks. You glance over, smile softly. "Oh, just someone I used to know." She wants a story, of course, so you begin again. Not quite the same tale, but close. This time, there are dragons involved. The pineapple is a relic of a forgotten queen. The gossip is literal magic. She laughs, wide-eyed and delighted. And in her eyes, you see it. The beginning of a new myth. The fruit lives on. And now, as spring folds gently into summer, and the smell of cut grass mixes with chimney smoke that no one seems quite ready to stop using, you find yourself revisiting old haunts. The salon chairs still creak in all the same spots. Lady Aldwych still mishears entire conversations and confidently responds with quotes from novels no one else has read. The sandwiches are still suspiciously triangular, but something in the air has changed. You realize, with a quiet amusement, that you've become a kind of legend yourself. People no longer whisper about your pineapple in hushed, skeptical tones. Instead, they reference it like folklore. She once made the Duchess admit she couldn't spell ananas. They say she got a proposal over a fruit bowl. I heard she reads fortunes in pineapple rings. You don't correct them. You simply sit, smile, sip your tea, and let the stories grow. A new girl, perhaps 20, slides into the seat beside you. Her cheeks flush with the particular strain of excitement that comes from being noticed by someone who's become myth adjacent. Was it really just a pineapple? She asks. You consider this. Yes and no, you say. It was never about the fruit. It was about the excuse. The excuse? To talk, to listen, to invent, to gossip, but gently, to look at something ridiculous and pretend it's regal. That's half of society, really. She nods, quiet, then asks, do you miss it? You look down at your gloved hands, then out the window, where a boy is trying to juggle pears, and very clearly failing. No, you reply, because I still carry it, in a way. A chuckle rises in your throat as you add, not literally. That was terrible for my back. You and the girl spend the next hour drafting an imaginary invitation for the pineapple's ghost. You don't know where she came from, or if you'll see her again, but her laughter feels familiar, like something sprouting again from a seed long buried. When the evening winds down and you return home, your house feels unchanged, but you know better. You walk into the parlor, pause by the velvet pillow, and light a single taper candle in its honor, not as a shrine, not as a farewell, but as a wink. You sit back, open your scrapbook one more time, and add a final line at the bottom of the last page. And in that still moment, surrounded by moths tapping gently at the glass, the slow ticking of the clock, and the whisper of your own breath, you feel the story settle, wind down, 300 words, and now let's let the room grow quiet. Let the last traces of candlelight flicker against the window panes, where night has already drawn its velvet curtains. Let the perfume of ripe fruit and soft paper fade into memory. The pineapple has played its part, and your hands, those gentle hands that once polished its skin, that held it aloft like a scepter of whispers, can rest now. The voices, the gossip, the distant laughter from tea rooms and salons, they drift into the background, becoming soft echoes carried away on the breeze. You've walked through the seasons of one peculiar fruit's social life, and in doing so, you've walked a little farther into your own quiet joy, your own rhythm. The world will always have its trends, its tokens, its strange little emblems that mean everything and nothing all at once. But here, in this small, sleepy corner of history, we made room for one. We gave it a name, a pillow, a purpose. And now, we let it go. So breathe in, slowly. Let your chest rise and fall with the rhythm of calm and quiet. There's nothing more to discover tonight. Just rest. Let the story linger like warm sugar on your tongue, and sleep gently, completely, as if held by satin and stories alike. Sweet dreams. Just rest. Let the story linger like warm sugar on your tongue, and sleep gently, completely, as if held by satin and stories alike. Sweet dreams.